Hi, everybody. So, today we're going to be looking at a chart called What Caused the Civil War. It's going to be a little bit of a different thing. We've done things like this in class before, but this one I'm going to I already filled out, I did it, and I just wanted to go over it with you. So, what caused the Civil War? So, let's start off with these regional economic differences over here. So, we pretty much know that since the very beginning of the country, the North has been more industrial, the South has been more agricultural, or almost entirely agricultural, and that is still going on here on the eve of the Civil War. So, if we look here, the North is industrial, producing manufactured goods, and has tons of free labor. So, it's not like there are no farmers, like there's no agriculture in the North. But in the North, they're almost all small farmers, like we've talked about. Subsistence farmers, farmers who are now starting, because of the American system, which we'll look at here in the West, they're able to send their goods all over the country or even to just regional cities. So if you're a farmer in New Jersey, you can send your goods to Boston. And it operates almost entirely on free labor, meaning it's not cost free. What it means is it's not slave labor. So although there are still some slaves in the North, by and large, slavery has been outlawed and every person gets paid for the work. In the West, they are basically producing farm goods, and because of the American system, canals, railroads, highways, they are able to send goods both to eastern cities but also overseas. They also have some slavery in some states, but it is not widespread because most of the places where they are, the goods they're producing, you don't need slavery. And in fact, slavery isn't all that beneficial. Now, in the South, let's take a look here, entirely based on cash crops, tobacco has really dropped off. It is now really cotton and sugar in the Deep South. The Deep South is now producing some sugar. Let's look at the different political theories. Let me. Oh, my handsome face is right in the way. Let me do this. I'll move myself over here. Okay, that's awkward. Put myself up there. So, if you look here, the different regional theories, you don't want slavery to spread. That's a huge source of agreement, even among moderate Democrats and Republicans, which have just formed, and the Free Soilers. So, in the North, this idea of let's not let slavery spread to be huge is a pretty popular idea. It is industrial. Their economics are industrial, so they're going to protect manufacturing. They're going to like tariffs, just like in the nullification crisis. They are going to like businesses that ship goods overseas. The South, however, is dependent on slavery and is hell bent on having the institution of slavery expand into the Mexican Cession. So this is really a big push, and you're starting to see a split between these two parties, or between these two regions. Now, people are pretty much going to base their politics on where they live more and more. Let's take another look at the end of political compromise. So, what do I mean by the end of political compromise? Remember, we had all these compromises that were working pretty well. Now, this is pretty much going to end. And it's just a running chain here that you can just follow the steps. So, one, the Declaration of Independence set up this debate over slavery. You can't base a country with something that says, we hold these truths to be self evident that all men are created equal and are endowed by God, or endowed by their Creator with certain inalienable rights. And among these are life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness, right? They're saying they have God given rights. This is why this country is being established. It's hard then to say, but we're keeping our slaves. It's an obvious contradiction. The Constitutional Convention, the Three-Fifths Compromise, baked slavery right into the constitutional cake. But it does end the slave trade in the future. Remember, they were allowed to in the future end the slave trade, not slavery, but the buying and selling or the importation of human beings, which is an obvious contradiction. Why would you limit it at all if it's not a bad thing? So there is a recognition there that not everyone's 100% on board. The Missouri Compromise set up that balance of the states. If a free state enters, there has to be a slave state to enter as well. And it also established that 3630 line, which made slavery a geographic institution as well. The nullification crisis made the federal government way more important. So now southern slave states are saying, wait a second, if the federal government is all that important in the slave debate, we have to be really careful because it depending on who becomes president, that could really influence our institution of slavery. The Compromise of 1850 set up popular sovereignty and allowed the new Fugitive Slave Act, which forced, at least in theory, northern states to return slaves to their owners, which they were completely opposed to, which they pretty much ignored. In some ways, the North nullified this Fugitive Slave Act, and the South was saying, wait a second, if nullification isn't a legitimate theory, why is the North not returning us our slaves? The Kansas-Nebraska Act, remember, gives popular sovereignty, and you start to have these clashes between the Free Soilers and the Border Ruffians, those really big slavery advocates. You get John Brown and the Potawatomi Massacre, right, cutting off people's hands. You have to be pretty fired up about something to cut off somebody's hands and heads, which he does. And then the real last straw was this right here, the Dred Scott decision, which you just read about. It said that there was an absolute right to own slaves, which means the Missouri Compromise had to be overturned because slavery should be legal in every state, according to this theory. It declared that anyone of African descent could not be a legal person, meaning they basically were not recognized as a legal human being. And as such, they could not be citizens. Now, this, in the video you watched on Friday, is clearly not constitutional. This is not what the framers had in mind. They never would have ever signed on to this idea. Okay? But that's what happened. Now let's look at the very last propelling issues, they call them. These things that really pushed everybody over the edge. Bleeding Kansas is a huge one. It shows that there are actual physical clashes between pro and anti-slavery advocates. Blood is actually spilled. People are actually killed over the issue of slavery. The Lincoln-Douglas debates showed that there was disagreement even among moderates. Remember, at the beginning of the war, Lincoln is not an abolitionist, but he doesn't want slavery to spread. Stephen Douglas is considered a more moderate Democrat. He's not one of these fire-eating slavery defenders, but he also thinks slavery should be allowed to spread. So even among moderates who would have agreed in years past, there's rather large disagreement. What else? Oh, John Brown's raid, which you just got in your lecture. John Brown's raid made the South very fearful that there actually would be slave revolts, that this thing could actually kick into a rather nasty civil war. And lastly, Lincoln being elected is the spark that blows up the powder keg, because now it kind of ties back up to here, the nullification crisis. Now you have someone who's on record saying slavery isn't going to end. So even if he is not an abolitionist, he is not going to allow slavery to spread, which means it's just a ticking clock before the South loses all of its power. All right, so this is a pretty good document. I am going to put this in Classroom so you can examine it, and I'll actually give you the one with my notes on it. Okay? Have a good day. Talk to you later.